Howdy folks, welcome back to Mingles with Jingles, episode 43. Yes, it's the return of the Q&A series with the mighty Jingles, where 1,500 of you ask questions and I answer 3 of them. Well, you know, I do my best. Anyway, let's crack straight on with the question. The first one this week, well, I'm attributing it to Eric Stephenson, although I've had this kind of question come from many, many Canadians just like him. He says, Jingles, I've got some questions for you. I might just be a mere Canadian subscriber. Those are his words, okay, not mine. You know, before all of Canada jumps all over me. What do you mean, mere Canadian? Right, these are his words. I might just be a mere Canadian subscriber, but I've never really heard you say much about Canada. I'm curious as to your thoughts on my country, as well as any experiences you've had with any Canadians, either while in service or as a civilian. Let me tell you about some Canadians, Eric. The first Canadian I ever met, I think I must have been 14 or 15 years old. It was when I lived in Swaziland and went to boarding school in South Africa. And her name was Roxanne Beckwith. She was the same age as me. She was in my class at school. We both lived in the same village in Swaziland, a place called Mflamanyati. And we both went to the same boarding school in South Africa, in a place called Barberton. And she was gorgeous. And she also had the hots for me, so, you know, that was nice. That was my first ever experience of anything Canadian. The next time I met anybody Canadian was about 20 years later, when we had a couple of Canadian contractors on board HMS Newcastle running trials on some new equipment that they were fitting. And they were nice guys. They were constantly pissed off with being mistaken for Americans, which I gather is a problem that Canadians get a lot. But, I don't particularly remember much about them. We invited them into our mess for a beer one night, and, they were great, but that's pretty much it. So my actual personal experiences with Canadians is extremely limited. One smoking hot girl when I was a teenager, and a couple of technical contractors when I was in the Navy. That's pretty much it. However, I do read a lot, and I'm currently reading a whole series of books by a British historian called Max Hastings, specifically about the Second World War. The one that I've just finished reading is called Armageddon, and specifically about the Second World War 1944-1945 Northwestern European campaign, told from the perspective of German soldiers, Russian soldiers, British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, German civilians, prisoners of war, concentration camp victims. It's an amazing book, and there's one of the stories in particular is about a Canadian major called David Rodgers. On the 26th of February 1944, the Canadian Cameron Highlanders were attacking in the Rhineland between Calcar and Udon. The attack began in mud and darkness, and the Camerons in their vehicles found themselves under heavy fire. One of their company commanders, Major David Rodgers, jumped down from his Kangaroo, which is a turretless Sherman used as an infantry carrier, and he ran into the nearest house defended by German paratroopers, which he cleared alone before his men reached him. He did the same with a second house, killing 4 of the enemy and capturing a dozen. He then returned to his battalion headquarters to report, and found the commanding officer dead, his intelligence officer severely wounded, and the position being sprayed by enemy automatic weapons. Major Rodgers, accompanied only by his Batman, ran headlong across open ground to a house from which the Germans were firing, kicked open the door, and pressed the trigger of his Sten gun. It was empty. He then grabbed his pistol and started firing, wounding 2 Germans and causing the other occupants to surrender. He then went on to clear the rest of the house room by room, killing or wounding 9 Germans and capturing 12. He then returned to assume temporary command of his battalion and toured each of its company positions on foot to ensure its security before he handed over to the unit second in command. For this morning's work, Rodgers was recommended for a Victoria Cross, although all he received was a Distinguished Service Order. His Victoria Cross citation was actually approved at every level all the way up the chain of command until it got as far as 21st Army Group and passed across the desk of Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery. And Montgomery himself crossed out the VC, changed it to a DSO and awarded it on the spot. As commander of the 21st Army Group, Montgomery could actually award a DSO, whereas he couldn't award a VC. And this seems to have happened quite a lot. You know, the more I read about the Canadian Army under the 21st Army Group in the Second World War, it just seems like the Canadians have a long and proud tradition of being nominated for Victoria Crosses and not getting them for one reason or another. I'll give you a couple of examples. Private Sidney John Cousins of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry of Toronto, Canada, unarmed, after being shot in the face, in excruciating pain for 6 hours, continually exposed himself to enemy fire with complete disregard for his own safety and well-being, and saved the lives of dozens of Canadian and British paratroopers. When that citation crossed his desk, not even Field Marshal Montgomery felt brave enough to downgrade it to a DSO. Corporal Topham got his Victoria Cross. So there you go, Canada. You had your moment of glory on Mingles with Jingles. I hope you're all happy now. And as a lucky and completely coincidental side effect, is about to become very famous on YouTube. That's it for this week, folks. See you next Monday, and take care.